area realtors. Together with the South Bend Human Rights Commission, we are honored to bring you this program on the 53rd anniversary of the Fair Housing Act. We'll go ahead and jump right in. One thing to note, after our Q&A session, we have a chance to win some giveaway prizes, so make sure you stick around for that. We'll have more details later. Right now, I'd like to introduce our moderator. He is one of the most passionate journalists in our area, earning multiple award nominations from the National Academy of Television Arts and Sciences, both as a student and as a journalist at WNDU. While originally from Chicago, Joshua now considers South Bend his home. You can find him on WNDU as 16 Morning News Now co-anchor every weekday morning. Joshua Short, thank you very much for being here. We welcome you, and I will turn the program over to you.
Myron, thank you, and thank you to everybody who's entered the chat, as I like to call it, and those who are on the panel as well. Thank you so much. For those who are showing their faces, thank you, and those who aren't showing their faces, I appreciate you all as well this morning. As you heard Myron talk about, today is a very important day, but this month as well is National Fair Housing Month. It celebrates the passage of the Fair Housing Act on April 11 of 1968, which was meant as a follow-up to the Civil Rights Act of 1964, by expanding on the previous acts and prohibiting discrimination concerning sale, rental, and financing of housing based on race, religion, nationality, origin, gender, so forth and so on. So this is very important. The act was later amended to include protections for people with disabilities and families with children. Fair Housing Month reminds us that the principle of fair housing is not just a national law, but a fundamental human concept. That is important. A fundamental human concept, an entitlement for all people. Today, we will hear from each of our amazing panelists within their area of expertise. They will each get some time, about 10 minutes or so, and we will then come back to everyone at the very end for our Q&A. For any questions you have, by the way, there's a way you can do this. Place them in the chat. We have that available to each of the people watching this morning. Put it in the chat there, and we will be sure to address those when the time comes and if we have time to get to all of them. And if you have a question directed for a specific panelist, you can also put that in the chat, okay? Everybody good? Give me a thumbs up if you guys hear me okay. Cool. I see some familiar faces there, and I see some real sleepy people too. This is good, okay. All right, up first, we have Gabrielle Robinson. She is the author of 8 books and over 40 articles. Robinson has been awarded the Sagamore of the Wabash, the Keys to the City of South Bend, and was inducted into the South Bend Community Hall of Fame. She's here today to speak about her book, Better Homes of South Bend, which I have a copy of, and I know a lot of people here who are part of this discussion have this as well. Better Homes of South Bend, an American story of courage. Through this, we learn of the struggle of a group of African-American workers at Studebaker Factory here in South Bend to build homes away from the slums where they were forced to live nearby where they worked. I'm so happy to bring in Gabrielle. Gabrielle, good morning. How are you?
Good morning, Josh. I've been a longtime fan of your always upbeat presence on the morning news. I find it very cheering to listen to someone always sound so positive. And
well, thank you, and I'm sorry. So I just wanted to put both of those out there. But no, thank you. I mean, you've written this book, you've written a slew of books as well, and you are so impactful to people who may not know about the very city that they live in. Even me, I've been here 4 years, I found out about this, and
I certainly learned a lot myself.
Yeah, and it's obvious, and it tells and it shows.
Yeah.
So learn us today. Tell us a little bit about you, and tell us a little bit about why today is so important. Give us a little bit of insight.
Okay, I was told to just give talk briefly about redlining, both in the past and today, and then just sketch some details about the Better Homes story, which in some ways shouldn't have been a story at all. They just wanted to find a nice place to live, but it was a story and a struggle of 4 years. I think that redlining and all the other things that kind of go with it, which is housing segregation and discriminatory lending procedures and all that, are really crucial factors in the ever-growing racial wealth gap and altogether in racial inequality. Forbes actually sees this, just fairly recently, sees this health gap as America's most pressing epidemic. And the authors of that book on reparations, which is really pushing in detail for reparations, called From Here to Equality, say that it's the strongest indicator of the cumulative effects of white supremacy in the United States. So it is, as Josh said, a hugely important issue. I haven't even read it yet, I've just ordered it, but I've read reviews. I would like us in some ways to be inspired, as I was, just by the title of Heather McGhee's new book, which is called The Sum of Us, What Racism Costs Everyone and How We Can Prosper Together. It's a powerful title and a hopeful title, that racism hurts all of us and we can heal together. I think I really look forward to reading it, and I think it would be a nice kind of mantra for our discussion. Redlining started under President Roosevelt in the 1930s, and it separated all US or most US towns and cities into areas where it was safe to give loans and areas that were marked by a red line, which were at risk of foreclosure. In the 30s also, the FHA was founded with its mission of helping the middle class own homes. And yet the FHA had at their basic tenet that stable neighborhoods need to be occupied by the same social and racial classes. So they would give underwrite loans only in white areas, not in the foreclosure risk areas. And they said they were the ones really pushing protective covenants, which would keep any of the racial minorities and others out of developments. And of course, this only accelerated after World War II, when, again, the federal government helped mass building of white suburbs, which the FHA would guarantee the loans, but which had all protective covenants, Levittown being the most famous. And since we are talking here to realtors, the National Realtors Association had a code of ethics which said never to introduce into a neighborhood any one person or any racial group whose presence would be detrimental to property values. That was their code of ethics at the time. So there were huge forces out there, an entirely rigged system that made it impossible for African Americans to acquire homes and thereby gain the foothold of wealth that the middle class then could pass on to their children and next generations. So this is where the Better Home Story fits in. They all came from the South to South Bend to work in factories. Again, most factories did not hire African Americans, although workers were desperately needed. Studebaker did only because they were unionized, but they put them in the worst jobs in the foundry. But what hurt them the most was living conditions. They lived in federally built, totally segregated what was called defense homes for workers in the defense industries. Their place was on Prairie Avenue, right across from the foundry where they were forced to work. And there was also the slums, the infamous slums of Maggie's Court and Horses Alley nearby. And of course, all the other factories and railroad lines and bars. And this was not why they had left the South, to get away from Jim Crow and then be confronted with Jim Crow in the North as well. And this is not what they wanted to have to raise their children. So they started a 4-year struggle to find a decent place to live. They kept it completely secret because if even word would get out, they knew they would be stymied. There would be some obstacles thrown their way. The banks wouldn't loan them money, the builders wouldn't build to code, the city was slow in providing sewers. They had so much going against them. But they had a wonderful rigorous organization, perseverance, and courage that saw it through, and they could celebrate after 4 years having built 22 homes in the 17 and 1800 block of North Elmer Street, which was an entirely white area. At that time, Lincoln Way was the dividing line. Anything north was white. And one of the big lessons, I think, from Better Homes is not only that they succeeded in this, but that they created a vibrant community which benefited their children and their children's children. One of the children who became a high school principal said that we should be forever grateful to our parents for having made this move. It's made a difference to all our futures. Over 50% of the children of Better Homes went to college, although many of their parents never had the chance to even finish high school. It's just a staggering statistic. And just a few years ago, Harvard did a big study where what happens to children who are moved to better, more stable neighborhoods, and they found that they were way more likely to attend college, which is what Better Homes could have told them way back in the 1950s. But what's shocking, as Josh just said, it's over 50 years after the Fair Housing Act, and that things have not changed all that much. That, as Richard Rothstein, the author of The Color of Law, says, the public policies of yesterday still shape the racial landscape of today. The system is still rigged, with banks not lending money. There's a New York Times had an article recently about 2,000 mortgages given on New Jersey and Connecticut and New York. Out of 2,000 mortgages, only 25 went to African American. So the system is still very much with us. And it is responsible for the ever getting bigger, the ever growing racial wealth gap, where the average net worth of a white family is 12 times that of a Black family right now. And, we often hear, yeah, we need to educate African Americans about, how to deal with banks and all that. And yeah, that is helpful. But basically, I think we need to educate ourselves about the reality of what's happening in this country and really face our country's past. Strangely, here, my German background, I've always been rather ashamed of being German. My German background comes in handily. I, in fact, was encouraged or got the guts to write my recent memoir, which is called Api's Berlin Diaries, My Quest to Understand My Grandfather's Nazi Past. I was encouraged when I found out that my grandfather had been a member of the Nazi Party. I just was I didn't even tell my husband. But I read, in preparation for Better Homes, I read Edward Ball's Slaves in the Family, and he countered his family's outrage that he would kind of expose them to this shame by saying, we have to acknowledge our country's past. And that certainly is what happened in Germany. When I grew up in the 1950s, there was complete silence about the past. It was as if Hitler and the Holocaust and the Third Reich had never existed. We didn't learn about it in school. It wasn't talked about. It just wasn't there. And it started in the 1960s that Germans became aware that in order to move forward, they really had to confront their past and face it. Not just with reparations, which also happened, of course, but in so many ways, in terms of in the schools, in terms of rebuilding synagogues and reestablishing connections with Jewish people. I just want to give one example, which I think is something that we might be thinking about, and that is the stumbling stones. I don't know whether you guys have heard. In German, it's Stolpersteine. They put in towns and cities across Germany in front of every house from where a Jewish family was taken away to a concentration camp. They put about this size bronze round stones that stick out a bit out of the pavement with the name and the date of the people who were taken away. And you're supposed to stumble over them. That's why they call them stumbling stones. As you go about your daily business and so on, it's supposed to bring you up short and make you think of what happened and confront the past. And I think doing this has really helped Germany move forward. And we are certainly way late, but at a point, hopefully now, that we also will be facing our country's past and acknowledging our responsibility to make up for it with, reparations of all forms, whether that is schooling or financial or whatever. And I think we are at this kind of tipping point. And I very much look forward to hearing from this distinguished panel. Thank you.
If I can, I want to call an audible. I have to ask you this question, Gabrielle, about, do you think this is an endless cycle? It's so cyclical, what's happening in this system. Is it hard to get out of? Will families ever be able to get out of it? Specifically, those families who are facing the housing disparities that have been levied against them. Do you think there's a light at the end of this tunnel? Do you think that the light at the end of this tunnel is another train?
No, I think there's many here who are much more knowledgeable, but there's so much we can do about changing lending practices, changing the FHA's behavior and what loans they guarantee. There is just a lot of things that can be done, and I think that will be done by now. An example, we all probably know people. I know some women, older Black women, who are trying to rebuild or restore their house. They cannot get a loan because their house doesn't assess for enough for the banks to make it worthwhile for the banks to give a loan. So this woman, one particular woman I have in mind, she has a credit card, and when that's maxed out, she has to stop again with her restoration until she's saved more money. It's an obvious way for both the city to help and the banks to help. Yeah. To give her, these are not huge loans, but to give her some loan to make this possible more quickly. So there's a lot of things, and I think we have now the will to do something. I don't know, I may be wrong, but I hope we see it like Heather McGhee, that this is hurting all of us. And we have to do something in order to have a livable city. We have to help those people, and it's not their fault that they are in the place they are.
And that's very important too. That's really important to note that. Thank you so much. And I hope we can get some questions in for you to answer later on after this discussion as well. Next up, I want to bring in Darryl Heller. There's Darryl right there. Darryl Heller, for those of you who don't know, he's the director of the IU Civil Rights Heritage Center. He has spent 20 years working in the field of human services, community development, and political activism. His experience has transformed the Civil Rights Heritage Center to a vibrant hub of activity in the fight for civil rights and social justice, which continues to this very hour as we speak, by the way. He teaches and facilitates discussions on the difficult topics of the history of racism and white supremacy, race construction, and the intersection of race and gender. He currently serves on the boards of the Community Forum for Economic Justice, Imani Unidad, and South Bend Board of Public Safety. Mr. Heller, you've got the floor. It's so good to see you again.
All right, well, thank you, Josh. And thank you, Gabrielle. Gabrielle touched on some of the history. Many of you know that formerly I'm trained as a historian and a long time community organizer activist, but the academic and community work together, I think, is an important conjunction. I want to build just a little bit on what Gabrielle talked about, and I'm going to share 2 slides in the screen. So I want to just show you a couple of things. I want to start with talking about the wealth gap, the wealth divide that Gabrielle mentioned. So what we see here is that the racial wealth divide is significant. Even as white wealth has increased over the course of this 21st century, Black wealth has remained stagnant. And that's true. And so the difference between wealth and income. So even when a Black family, a Black household and a white household have the same income, their wealth actually is different. And wealth by the Federal Reserve is measured along 4 different axes, home ownership being only one of them. Home ownership is clearly one. Inherited assets, what you inherit is another form of wealth. Sheltered plans, 401ks, bonds, savings plans of that nature also constitutes wealth. And then your own personal savings and or investments. So along those 4 categories, what we find the divide just continues to increase between Blacks and whites in America. Gabrielle touched a lot on the history of how that got produced relative to housing. You know, it's in the 30s. You know, actually, many people don't know, you know, and as a historian, I feel like I should say this, that before 1933, most working class Americans, at least, didn't own their own homes. It was just too onerous. The typical bank mortgage required a 50% down payment on your home, and your mortgage would only be given for 5 to 7 years. And that was just way out of the reach of most working people and even most middle-class people. And then when the bottom fell out under the Depression, you know, even more people lost their homes. During the Depression, over 250,000 homes were foreclosed in 1932 alone. So it was significant in terms of the impact. And Roosevelt came along, as Gabrielle talked about, with the Federal Housing Administration and the Homeowners Loan Corporation, which guaranteed loans for working people to be able to amortize their loans, their mortgage, and as well require them only to have a 20% down payment and extended their mortgage for up to 20 years, which then brought it within the grasp of a much wider swath of Americans. However, it was predominantly, as Gabrielle said, served predominantly white Americans. Most Black Americans were left out of that, were excluded. I can say a lot more about that, but I'll let that sit for the moment because I want to just talk just for a minute about South Bend and what the impact has been on housing locally. And a second. So redlining. This is just a visual map of what the redlining in South Bend looked like. What you find is that the areas that are in green were the highly restricted in-demand areas, professionals and up-and-coming folks. But these areas were, in some ways, by statute, by law, and by custom, had to not include a single foreigner or African-American in order to get a green designation. The blue designation was still desirable, but it had reached this peak of that kind of restrictions. It was on the cusp, perhaps, of being infiltrated. You could get a loan on a mortgage in these blue areas, but not as, you weren't categorized as highly as the green areas. It's the yellow and red areas that are significant for our conversation. The yellow designation was a declining neighborhood, and the red area was a hazardous. And by hazardous, meaning that it was predominantly inhabited by African Americans. So in South Bend, you can see how that distribution of real estate and the capacity or ability to get mortgages was distributed. One of the factors of South Bend, I'm gonna just stop sharing here. So one of the factors that maintained segregation, because in 1948, the Supreme Court ruled out restrictive covenants and these kinds of practices by the state, but in private transactions, they continued. So restrictive covenants were the mode of choice, and a restrictive covenant and many of you as real estate agents, I'm sure know this, but those in our audience, a restrictive covenant is really just an agreement, and it has some legal binding that when the property is sold, it says what you can do to the property, how you can use the property. Restrictive covenants in this case clearly designated that in these green areas, in the areas that were for professionals, whites, whites only actually, that this property, the next home, it can only be sold to another white person. That either African Americans, and in some cases Jews or foreigners, or other restrictions on who the property could be passed on to. So I just want to share some facts about what that looked like here in our community. So in Sunnymead, the Sunnymead neighborhood was developed in 1925. And Sunnymead is that area what is that? East of the river, around IUSB, that part of town, that neighborhood there. When Sunnymead was developed in 1925, the master deed, which is the first deed of the property when it was sold, stipulated, and I'm going to have to read this because I want to get it right. The restrictive covenant stated that no plot in said subdivision nor any interest therein shall be conveyed or leased to or by or be acquired by any person other than one of the Caucasian race. A person other than of the Caucasian race shall be permitted to occupy any portion of any plot in said subdivision or any building at any time except a domestic servant. So the only Black people allowed to live there were servants, and only in the employment of a white owner. This promise to not sell or lease the property to any person, to anyone other than the Caucasian race, is still actually in the deeds of most properties in that neighborhood. They're unenforceable, and most people many homeowners don't even know they're there, but they actually still exist in print and on paper. Similarly, the master deed for Jefferson Park neighborhood, which was founded in 1905, stated that no person other than a member of the Caucasian race may acquire, hold, lease, or occupy any dwelling or house on any lot in said addition, provided, however, this should not exclude the housing of domestic help and chauffeurs, so on and so forth. And just one final one, in the Diamond Lake area, the restrictive covenant stated that no transfer or title to any lots in this edition shall be made to any person who is not a Caucasian Gentile. And so therefore, kind of not only excluding African Americans, but also Jews from acquiring property in that neighborhood. You know, as I said, in 1948 in Shelley v. Kramer, a Supreme Court case, the restrictive covenants were no longer legally binding, but they were continued to be enforced through private transactions. So that's kind of the context inside some of the structures. The question we need to ask now is, what have been the long-term effects of that, even as you remove these barriers? And they certainly were removed after 1968 with the Fair Housing Act. That the effect of those many years of restricting African Americans has an ongoing. Hold on one second. I'm sitting in my center, and there we go. The long-term effect of these restrictions continue. So I wanted to share, and I want to thank publicly Aladine DeRose and Jay Lewis have been doing a lot of research on housing here in South Bend, and I just want to share some of their findings. They note that particularly with the better homes that Gabrielle has, informed us so deeply about, the average cost of a new home in South Bend at the time Better Homes was founded was approximately $9,000, which translates today to about $96,000. So the cost of Leroy Cobb's home that Gabrielle highlights, the cost of his home, and I think I got this right, Gabrielle, was $8,250.
Right.
So let's look at the value of those homes today in the Better Homes area. So a comparable home. So let's just compare homes in Better Homes and homes in, say, Sunnymead. And we can see kind of what is the accumulated wealth that has been generated from home ownership. And this is important why home ownership is not the only indicator of wealth. So if we look at similar homes built in 1950 in the Sunnymead area near Evans High School, one home, and I'm not going to give the address, a home in Sunnymead that has 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, and a total of 908 square feet, sold for $105,000 in 2021, February 2021. Another home in Sunnymead has 3 bedrooms, 1 bath, 912 square feet. It also sold for $105,000. Comparable homes in the Better Homes area, 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, total of 960 square feet. The assessed value of that home was $63,000. Another house right next door sold for $37,000 in 2009. So the appreciative value of a home and the interest that you gain in it has distinct differences depending on what neighborhood you live in. In the neighborhood, the Better Homes prior to Leroy Cobb and the Better Homes folks moving, it was all white. But as more and more African Americans, the home ownership values still have a tendency to depreciate or decrease based on race, based on zip codes. And so the question that you asked, Joshua, of what can we do about it? We need to acknowledge this fact, and we need to continue to challenge and change the structures that produced it, and also the practices that are continuing. I'm just shocked at what Gabrielle said. 2,000 mortgages, only 25 went to African Americans. Those are the kinds of issues we need to address. I'll leave it there.
Yeah, and Darryl, it sounds like you can go on for hours, but there are numbers that say, well, there's a trend and we think that there's a connection. And then you look at numbers like that, and it's obviously more than just a trend. It's reality. It's like looking at the numbers for what they are. Sometimes you connect dots and then sometimes there's a big old dot, One
of the things that's often said is that, we fixed all the problems, we removed all the barriers. Why are we still having these conversations? But, what happened in the past is not the past, it's actually the present. And we're still continuing to live the effects of these past. And it's in the living memory of people who bought homes in Better Homes. People are still alive that remember those days of restricted covenants when they couldn't buy a home anywhere else. So it's very much present, not just the past.
Yeah, that is telling. Darryl, we appreciate that. Seriously, thank you for that perspective. Let's go to our next panelist, which is going to be Sam Centellas, the Executive Director of La Casa de Amistad, a Latino-focused nonprofit community center providing youth programs, city ID programs that's made national news, by the way, immigration legal program, and initiatives to empower immigrant and Latino-owned businesses. He was appointed by the mayor of South Bend as a commissioner to the Housing Authority and to the Diversity Utilization Board, helping develop minority and women-owned businesses as well. He holds advocacy as a core part of his life and currently serves on many local and national boards. So here to discuss how the Latinx community is being impacted by all this, I'm going to turn it over to someone who does not work that much. He just does it on and off. Sam Centellas, everybody. Hey, Sam.
Thank you, Josh. Thanks for the introduction. Well, thanks everybody for being here. There's a large group of folks here. I think this is a really important topic, and thank you to the presenters before me, because this is a good kind of stream to flow and talk about that. So some of the things I plan to cover, I think Darryl has usually did a much better job than I would have. And so I'll dovetail a little bit on those things. So those were great. Thank you. One, I always like to start off anytime I talk a little bit about the Latino Latinx population. I like to remind folks that we're not a monolithic group. And so the group is very, very diverse, right? So there are people who would identify as Hispanic, Latino, Latinx that have been in this country before this was a country. And there are some people that are Latino, Latinx, Hispanic, right? However, the term you use, that don't speak Spanish. There's some that don't speak English. There's some that don't speak either of those languages. So we're a wide-ranging group, and so right here in South Bend, you'll see that kind of consistent swatch of folks. And so you know, I'm a Bolivian immigrant. I came here when I was 7 years old, but I'm a naturalized citizen. And so once again, I always like to be clear on that. But I will, as I walk through, kind of talk about how these impacts are happening, one, to the kind of racial group as a whole, but also then specifically to immigrants or people who maybe don't speak English well, people who are either not citizens or maybe undocumented, and all those ways that the community is impacted. I'll also keep looking over to the side here because I've got my notes on my other screen here. So I'm not just watching my kids run around the house like crazy. So in terms of how the community is impacted, I also like to caveat something that our community, oftentimes, especially the lower socioeconomic part of the community, is renting, not because they choose to rent. And so I also want to be clear, like, people who choose to rent is great, right? So I work with a lot of, you know, especially I work with a lot of millennials who just like to rent. They like flexibility and whatever, right? So not knocking renting, but our community tends to rent because they don't have another option. And when I first got involved in talking about kind of home ownership and the challenges around it, was actually doing a great outreach event we did, the Realtors Association did in the neighborhood. And I realized that homes around La Casa, so some of you heard Darryl Heller say a house appraised for $37,000, and you're like, what? And some of you know, but there's homes around that Western Avenue neighborhood sell between sometimes as low as $15,000 to maybe a nice one's going for $45,000. When I realized people were paying $800 or more to rent a home that they could own for half the price, I started having conversations with my friends about why is that the case? That doesn't make sense. You know, if this family can afford to do that, they've been renting that house for 8 years. They should have owned it twice over by now. And started jumping into some of the challenges around why that's happening. And it's extremely complicated. So for me to use up my short 10 minutes, we don't have time to get into it, and I don't understand it all. So that's where I will jump into. One of the challenges for our community is language. Language is a barrier. For anybody here who's a native English speaker, who's ever bought a home, refinanced a home, or done any of that, all that paperwork to buy your house, oh my God, right? I don't understand it all. And I have a master's degree and I grew up speaking English, right? Imagine if you didn't speak the language and you were trying to understand all that, right? It's complicated. So it automatically scares you to walk into that. And I have seen great movement in the industry around having some bilingual realtors, Spanish speaking realtors, or realtors that know right away to try to connect to somebody who can help them translate. So once again, a barrier that's being slowly removed, but removed, which is very helpful to help people do that. So the other one then is when you talk about working with immigrants. And in that whole spectrum, whether they're undocumented or just not US citizens yet, in that spectrum, people don't necessarily understand what their ability is to buy. And so, you know, I always use the example, you do not have to be a United States citizen to buy property in the United States. I like to tell people that over and over. Many of us from Latin American countries, where you're from, you're only allowed to buy property in that country if you're a citizen. They're not allowed foreign investors, right? I think part of the problem with some of the development that's slow to happen in this town is that it's owned by foreign investors that aren't investing, right? And so unfortunately, anybody can buy in this country, or fortunately, however you look at that. But a lot of times our community doesn't know, like, oh, I'm not a citizen, I can't. I'm like, no, you're not a citizen, you can buy. And so that's another thing that just sometimes it's misunderstandings, but people don't necessarily know. The other big one, and then I'll kind of jump into some of the solutions while I talk about the challenges still here as I watching my time. But the other one that's a challenge, if you think about $25,000 to $40,000 homes is kind of that spot on the West Side. Most of the real estate industry runs on commission. And so as a commission industry, you're just not going to get a lot of people wanting to do that work. The same thing, like if you're a server, right? You want to work at a fancy dinner restaurant. You don't want to work at a cheap breakfast diner, right? If you're working for tips, right? You want to work at Ruth Chris, right? And so thinking about that from a realtor standpoint, it's the same amount of work from a paperwork standpoint to sell a $25,000 home. It's actually probably more work, right? Because that's probably the client's first time home. They might not speak the same language you do. They're just going to need more help because they're probably a first time buyer versus someone who's buying a $250,000 home somewhere else in the community, who it's their third time buying a house and they know the process and they don't even want to read anything. They'll just sign everything. And so if I'm a realtor, right, looking at that, it's like, that's easy money to do this deal. This other deal is not good money, and it's going to be a lot of work. And it's the same thing from the mortgage side to the broker side to the bank side, right? If I'm the financial institution making a loan, I'm excited about making interest. Interest rates are low, right? Make sure you're refinancing. If you're buying, this is the time to do it, right? Interest rates are low. But once again, if you're the financial institution, you're making more money on that $250,000 home. So you've got investment. You want that to happen. The $25,000 home is actually a risky investment for you. And so I'll talk about that from the value standpoint. So then as I've learned more about this, the other challenge is, how does somebody get a loan to purchase something that's actually technically, from an appraisal standpoint, some of those homes are worth negative money. And when I explain that to people, they're like, what do you mean? I see a lot of head nodding. Like, yeah, you look at a $20,000 home. And I use this example, the house right by La Casa, we actually worked with the family to help them buy it. They bought it for $19,000. The house on appraisal probably needed $30,000 worth of work, right? A new roof on a house is almost the same cost, whether it's a little 1-story or the same size 2-story, right? Same size roof, but it needs a $12,000 roof. It needs $8,000 worth of HVAC. It needs $3,000 worth of windows. It needs $4,000 worth of electrical work. And then now that house that you're going to pay $19,000 for actually brings you a bill of $40,000 if you were to do all the things that like an FHA would require. And so that's that next standard is, how do you get that? And I think Gabrielle mentioned, a family wanting to get a loan to try to repair a home they already own, right? Well, when the bank says your home's only really worth $30,000, I can't loan you $20,000 to put a new roof on it, because if you default on that, I don't want your home, because it's not worth anything to the financial institution. And so it's just that whirlwind of, from the financial institution side, it's an overly risky investment. And that's not even racial. I think the lines were created and now those neighborhoods have been segregated, and that's been the focus. But I couldn't probably get a mortgage, right? And I'm a professional in the community, right? I know half the financial institution folks, but I wouldn't be able to get a loan because the financial institution is going to say, I can't give you $30,000 on that home, because if it goes upside down, it's not worth it to me. And then the other one then is all these fixed costs. And so this is the other challenge on how we help reduce fixed costs. The cost to close a mortgage is the same whether you're closing a $25,000 home or a $250,000 home. You got to have it appraised and assessed, and you got to do all this paperwork, you got to do all this work. It's hard to roll that into the cost of the home. And so it's all those issues that have compiled. So I think that's how what happened 50 years ago is being continued today in a structural way. And the folks who are involved, I think, are trying to do their best. I see a lot of faces I recognize are trying to do the best, but it's the structure that's broken. And we need more ways and avenues to help fix those pieces, to help move those around. And so that's the next thing, so my last point is, by and large, people who are low income is, they're challenged. They don't want something free, right? They want to get a loan like anybody else to buy a house. They want to be able to get a home equity line like anybody else to fix up their home. And so it's like, how do we get creative to do these solutions? And I'm excited about some recent movement with the city, and with some other ways to say, how do we put this together? I've been really excited this workshop and others, and great work I've seen from the Realtors Association, and local real estate companies to say, like, how are we helping fix this? And I think we're finally to a place where we've always said somebody should be doing something about this. And I think now we're finally saying we need to be doing something about this, and we're going to. And so I challenge you to figure out, how is it that you are part of the we, instead of saying that somebody should be fixing this. Get involved and be part of the fixing. But thank you.
If I heard that correctly, can you I never knew that about anybody can buy a home, even a non-citizen. Did I hear that correct?
Yeah, and even non-citizens can get a loan. There's several financial institutions, and even undocumented folks that don't have lawful presence here can actually buy, because you could buy from overseas, right? Someone living in Switzerland can just call John over at Cressy, Everett, and say, I want to buy a big building and stuff, and they'll make that happen. And so, yeah, anybody can buy property in the United States. I just picked on John because I see him on the screen there. So
perfect. Okay, we appreciate it, Sam. Thank you. All right. Before we get to our next speaker, which is going to be Deanna Moya, we're going to talk to her in just a second. I want to ask a question for everyone who's watching. How many inquiries does the Human Rights Commission typically receive in 1 year? Take a guess. You will not fail this class. Take a guess. And we can see some of the results coming up as we speak. The options 1,400, 800, 4,000, or 5,500. How many inquiries does the Human Rights Commission of South Bend typically receive in 1 year? And it looks like many people are continuing to vote. So I'll give it a couple more seconds. I think we got about 30 seconds in. I'll give it 30 more seconds for you all to vote. Looks like 77% of you all voted. I know a few more people are still voting. 58. We got about 75 people watching, so we'll try to get this to at least 65 to see what you guys think.
And I think all the panelists can't vote, so take us off that list.
Yeah. Okay, there it is. So it looks like the majority of you all, 40% in fact, believe 4,000 inquiries. So to tell us more about this, Deanna Moya, who I just talked about, she's the housing manager for the South Bend Human Rights Commission. She has served in various roles with the HRC for over 16 years and has a very diverse background of work. She has her federal certification in fair housing investigations for the Department of Housing and Urban Development. By the way, if you answered 4,000, correct me if I'm wrong, Deanna, that is correct, right?
You are correct.
That is telling.
That is. And actually, that is, first of all, good morning. And welcome to everyone, and I am excited to be here and part of this very distinguished panel. I appreciate any opportunity to plug the Human Rights Commission, to share information and further our cause. And I believe part of it is because we often hear from individuals who call us, we didn't know you existed, we didn't know you were here, what do you exactly do? And we thought that HUD, which we do have a contract with, only deals with Section 8 and or public housing. Not true. We actually deal with, private transactions as well. Anything having to do that's covered by the Fair Housing Act, we enforce as well, because the City of South Bend's Human Rights Ordinance is substantially equivalent to what the Fair Housing Act is, which is enforced by HUD. So just to share that, that's what we do. Not the only thing that we do, but we do file, we do accept and file and investigate complaints because we are an enforcement agency. I'm not an attorney. I just want to disclose that right up front. Not an attorney. So a lot of the information I'm sharing is either information that I have right in front of me, and like Sam, I'll be reading. If you see me, looking down, it's because I'm reading from my notes. But yes, it's over 4,300 inquiries that we receive in a year, and I'm gonna speak specifically about our office. We are one of the few FAP agencies in Northern Indiana. And what that means is that we're a fair housing assistance program agency. And so we are tasked with enforcement and jurisdictional cases that if there's an aggrieved party that's claiming that they were discriminated against, then we of course are the agency that would be investigating cases. And so those 4,000 plus inquiries is actually on the low end. And anyone care to take a guess why it's on the low end this year? And that was for 2020. Those are 2020 stats. Anybody? No.
Pandemic.
The moratorium.
Mm.
The moratorium.
Mm-hmm.
So right. So the moratorium has caused an interesting situation. And we've seen it across the board with renters, and of course, in the mortgage and the fair lending process. And so what that's going to look like, we won't know. I know that there's probably about, I think, 34% renters currently in South Bend who have that situation going, whether they choose to have that. Or whether they choose to go into a mortgage situation. Again, that's a choice. And sometimes it's not. And so when it's not, there are times that folks suffer from discriminatory actions and or acts, and that's where we begin. That's where we become involved. And so, you know, the factors for what we look at when we're filing charges are based on race, color, religion, sex, national origin, disability, and familial status. HUD has recently also added language concerning if, say, for example, you have been a victim of discrimination because of your sexual orientation or gender identity. That's one of the newer provisions that was added, I believe, maybe earlier this month, maybe last month. And so that is something that we are also, we also in our ordinance, in South Bend City's ordinance, have had probably since about 2012. So while it was a local law, now it's a federal law. And so we are able to, you know, file those charges as well. You know, as I've heard the panelists speak, you know, some of the information was, you know, what are we doing to address these fair lending, you know, issues? And, you know, we of course have that Home Mortgage Disclosure Act, which came about in 1975. I'm sure most of you are aware of that. And in part it requires, you know, certain lenders to report their loan data to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. And from that, both the Bureau and the Department of Justice evaluate that lending data to ensure that lending practices are fair and equal. But, you know, oftentimes, you know, patterns take time to develop, and the agencies are looking at that, you know, and for the most part, I believe that sometimes where there is a lack of individuals coming forward to share that they have been a victim of discrimination in a fair lending situation, it's because we don't know where to report. We don't know where to report these actions. We don't know where to report the providers, the lenders, you know, and in other areas too. You know, there's steering, there's blockbusting, issues again covered by the Fair Housing Act, issues again that we cover as well. But we, again, you know, there's a disconnect about where do we go, where do we report this, and interestingly enough, you know, the federal agencies like the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, HUD, the Department of Justice, they have their own complaint sections as well. If you are not able to get into a FAP agency or this agency or whatever the reason, if we are not able to meet that jurisdictional purposes, of course, we share that information forward. We like to think that we are a very Google-based organization as well, because we Google everything. And so part of that would be is to share this information and advocate for the individual on that behalf as well. In that, here's the information. If there's disconnect, let's call the agency. Let's find out what's going on. I wish we were more like a FIP, because a FIP is more of a private, a fair housing organization that actually gets to go in and do some research and testing prior to building up a charge, whereas we are on the receiving end of someone who's already filing a charge. And so just, you know, again, difference between agencies and what HUD funds, et cetera, and that kind of stuff. And again, we are not just solely based for an individual that receives government rental mortgage assistance. We are also for private transactions, et cetera, with a couple of exemptions here or there. But we pretty much cover what is the Fair Housing Act. I did have some slides I wanted to share, but I believe that, you know, if I start to do that, I'll keep talking for the rest of the time. And that's probably, you know, I don't want to do that because I know that there are other speakers and I wish to respect their platform as well.
It's just John, you're fine.
I definitely don't want to do that. So, but we have a great resource page, and we're really good about, again, getting resources to the community, whether it's HUD.gov, whether it's, you know, again, if you believe that you suffer discrimination due to your credit, you know, again, filing with the Equal Protection Credit Act, that you can file directly with them as well. I mean, those are resources, again, that don't always filter out to individuals who need it. And so again, we try to fill that gap as best as possible, and again, try to move them in a direction where this might be beneficial to them. We primarily deal with a lot of rental complaints, and I don't know if I shared that before or not. And with those rental complaints, again, we find that an individual may have been able to move forward into, say, for example, a mortgage, but for whatever reason, they either had issues with their credit or didn't realize what all encompassed. And as Sam mentioned earlier, you know, it's a big process when you're planning to buy a house. And so HUD, and this is where I am going to share my screen. HUD has an excellent guide. It's called the Fair Lending Guide. Exactly what it says. Can everyone see that?
No, not yet,
No.
Deanna. Try it
Okay,
again.
let me see. I don't know if I'm not able to. Well, nonetheless, it's called the Fair Lending Act, or the Fair Lending Guide, and you can find that on HUD.gov. But you can also contact us. It's about 30, 40 pages long, but it takes you through the process of purchasing a. Oh, there we go. Thank you. So that guide right there will, and it is available in other languages, and this is something that we often send to individuals who say, look, I'm you know, because we get calls from all over the place, and part of it is, hey, I'm getting ready to buy a house. What do I need to do? Where do I go? I'm not sure what I need. And so this guide here will walk you through that process. And again, it is in different languages. You can request it directly from HUD, but you can also get that copy from us. And we try to ensure that we send it out to folks who are interested in it. Thank you. So again, we provision of services as best as possible with the resources that we have available from other agencies. And part of it is, again, to connect the community to what their rights are, how they can appeal, you know, what does communication look like with agencies that they might fear. And so we attempt to close that gap as best as possible. And of course, you know, it's disheartening when we have over 4,000 plus calls, and they are individuals, and 34% of those calls happen to do with housing concerns, and that's a lot. That's just way too much. I wish there was a day where the Human Rights Commission was no longer needed for the reason that, you know, we've eradicated discrimination, because that is the commission's, that's part of the commission's mission and purpose. But meanwhile, we're here, and we will assist anyone who needs us, or to the best of our ability. And so, okay, and that's it for me, unless there are any current questions, or I think there's a Q&A after, I believe.
There is, Deanna, but I want to really quick touch base on that, the 4,000 cases that you had mentioned. Did you say that's actually a lowball number this past year? Did you say that was due to the moratorium? What did you say about that?
Right, so thank you, yes. So the 4,000 plus inquiries are actually calls that we've received from individuals within and even just actually, and I'm in, here I go. The South Bend Human Rights Commission is a really great agency. So we end up with a lot of referrals from all over the USA. And so it's interesting to me that they will call us first, and then of course we're referring them out to other agencies, but then they have calling us back and saying, hey, can you still, you know, help me with this, or can you provide this resource? Because HUD, you know, again, is across the nation. And so it's not just particular to one state or, you know, city, et cetera, that type of thing. So those resources are available to them. But of those 4,000 inquiries, again, 34% are housing. And those calls are, that's low on the low end, and that's only because of the moratorium. We deal primarily with rental complaints and issues, and because of the moratorium, which has kind of stopped the evictions from occurring, we are not receiving as many calls. Last year's, I think it was roughly about 6,000 calls that we received. So that it's low for us. But already just in the month of March, we're just shy of 800 inquiries already. And so we believe that where the situation occurs is when we're not sure what's going to happen with the moratorium, whether it's going to be extended or not. And that's where we start to see, you know, the calls come in. And then we've received a lot of calls for the financial assistance, which the IHCDA has, you know, received monies from the government to be able to assist individuals with their mortgage and rental payments. And so we push that information as well.
Okay, I really appreciate that clarity. I was just curious too, because I know that moratorium has impacted so much and so many people too.
Right.
Okay, thank you, Deanna, seriously,
Thank
for
you.
that information and everything else that she mentioned. There are links right now in the chat. You can go to that. You can click those as well. Those are live, and you can get some more awesome information about all those things that she was talking about too. Last but certainly not least, we finally get to our friend John Souza. He is the president of Cressy and Everett Real Estate and commissioner as well for the Indiana Real Estate Commission. John has been quoted in USA Today, Realtor Magazine, as well as presented at events including Inman, if I'm saying that correct, Inman Connect, bar camps, and leading real estate companies of the world conferences. He served as 2018 president of the Indiana Association of Realtors as well. He also served in many roles with the MLS, associations, and committees. John also gives back to the community and serves as a mentor to Notre Dame students, which is so important because a lot of people, a lot of students, they really look up to people like you. John, thank you for being here. Thank you for doing this as well.
Joshua, thank you. I appreciate the intro. You read it perfectly. Thanks.
Thank you.
Hey,
I don't hear that every morning. Let me tell you, I don't hear that.
Hey, no, in all seriousness, thank you. And thank you to everybody who's participating this morning. I see a count of 79 here in the meeting. I especially see a lot of Cressy and Everett Realtors here. Thank you guys for being here. I know how important it is to manage your time well at this point, and the fact that you're giving us this time this morning, at a time when you're so busy, tells me a lot about how you're seeing this topic and the importance of it. So I appreciate that. I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of realtors and how we got into the situation. And I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully you can see it there. When I talk a little bit about the past, the present, and the future of this. And I'm going to try really hard to not repeat any of what we have said already. But I believe that we're in a journey. It's a long journey. It's been a long journey. And you know what? We're not there yet. We're not even nowhere near the end of the story yet. So here's what we know. I'm going to take a cue from what Gabrielle was talking about, and she used the word confronting. I think that's critical. I think we need to acknowledge and confront our past first, so that we can get that behind us and put the energy in doing what we need to be doing today to make things better for everybody involved. And I like to think of the term really fairness in housing. To kind of separate it from the legalities of it, because while the rules are super important and we must know them and obey them, it's a larger issue. It's this concept of whether we are really welcoming of folks and whether we're approaching our profession in a fair way. So I'm going to say some things, guys. It's probably going to sound harsh, probably going to sound like I'm not liking realtors, like I'm hating on all realtors, past and present. That's not it. Trust me. If you hang in there, I think you'll realize that by the time we get to the end, it's got a really nice, hopeful message. What I'm going to talk about. I'm going to share my. Yeah, I have. By no means am I saying that everybody in the past was a bad person. Quite the opposite. We know that realtors have done amazing work, but we're using today's sensibilities, today's understandings, today's awareness to look at the past, and that's a really tricky position to be in. Okay, hindsight is really critical, but we need to make sure that we're using it the right way. And the reality is the following, guys: realtors have not always been on the right side of history. I gotta say it. There's a number of times. I'm going to give you two examples. I won't go through every single one, but I'm going to give you two examples that we really need to own up to. So the first one is the quote that Gabrielle already mentioned, because it's so critical. We are so guided by our code of ethics, but this sentence was in our code of ethics for many, many, many years. And I'll read it again. Gabrielle did a good job, but I'm going to read it again because every time I get to talk about this, I do, because it's so important that we acknowledge this. Our realtor should never be instrumental in introducing into a neighborhood a character, property, of occupancy, members of any race, nationality, of any individuals whose presence will clearly be detrimental to the property values in the neighborhood. It's shocking, right? When we read that today, that should go into your ears and make them hurt. It should. But you know what? That's what it was. And that's, it wasn't because we invented it to be as evil as we could possibly be, right? It wasn't that. We are following the rules and the norms of the time. We were doing what the FHA rules tell us. By the way, since we're pimping a couple of books, I'm going to highlight this one as well. If you guys have not seen this one, The Color of Law, great book. Many people in real estate are reading it. And one of the things that you'll walk away with is an understanding of how systemic these issues have been. The federal housing authorities' lending practices, going back to the middle of the 20th century, really dictated how we get to quotes like this one, right? How we get to that map that was brought up, the famous redlining maps. And I'm glad we got to see that one of South End. It's all part of a process. It's a painful quote, like I said, but I think we have to kind of know that this was it. The good news about this, though, is that, well, I'm going to give you another example before I move on. Also, the 1968 Fair Housing Act that we talk so much about and that we think is such a strong bedrock of the progress being made, NAR, National Association of Realtors, opposed it at first. We were not for the act passing. We came around to it, but that wasn't our initial place. And again, those are horrible things to kind of be reminded of, but it's important because we have to own up to that history so that we can be better about it. And in the process of being better and in the process of acknowledging, we've made some statements. And I'm going to put another statement up here on the screen. This is a statement made recently by Charlie Oppler. Charlie is a friend. He's a managing broker of a brokerage in New Jersey. But more importantly, Charlie is the president of the National Association of Realtors, president of NAR currently. And NAR has about 1.4 million members, is the largest trade association in the country, and probably the most powerful lobbying organization in the country as well. And Charlie made this statement as part of a formal apology to everyone involved for the actions of the past. I'm going to read the sentence for you. What realtors did was an outrage to our morals and to our ideals. It was a betrayal of our commitment to fairness and equality. I'm here today as the president of the National Association of Realtors to say that we were wrong. We can't go back and fix the mistakes of the past, but we can look at this problem squarely in the eye. And on behalf of our industry, we can say that what realtors did was shameful and we are sorry. So there, we have an apology. Take it for what it's worth. But I think back to our point of acknowledging the past and coming to some kind of reconciliation about it, and then learning from it and moving forward. That's where we is. I am really grateful and hopeful for some of the progress that we have. And I've always liked this quote. Never doubt what a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can do to change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has changed the world. And I think that's how we get to today, okay? And that's the hopeful part of it. While I can talk about those two horrible examples, which again is just as painful, should be painful to your ears and to your soul, we're not there anymore. And we're not there anymore because people like you and I, people in the industry, came together and said, hey, not right anymore, not cool anymore, right? We need to do something. And whether it was because we just agreed to change our minds, or whether because we came up and we revised the code of ethics, by the way, I guess revised all the time. It got revised this last year in a significant way. So we agreed that we needed to be someplace else, and we made that change. We also agreed that our federal laws shouldn't be where they are, or our state laws, and we use our lobbying power to reach out there and make those changes as well. So I'm acknowledging those issues in the past, and I'm telling you that they're better today because we did the work, because we spent time in meetings like this talking about the issues and making them better. And we're not done. Obviously, we need to move on. So the present, let's talk about the present for a second. If as a realtor, what you think of when somebody says fair housing is the nitpicking that somebody's going to come at you for using the word walking in a property description, right? Within walking distance to something. If that's really all you think about, you're missing the boat. This is not what we're talking about today. We're talking about the really important stuff. And at a very personal level, again, if you don't think that this impacts us, let me ask you to find the time, find the right place, and ask a realtor of color, whoever you can think of, ask them about their experiences doing their work while being a person of color. You may be shocked about what you hear. They often don't want to talk about these issues because it's difficult, it's embarrassing, for all the right reasons. But when you do get somebody who's been in the business for a while talking about these topics and these issues, you'll hear some shocking stories. And I don't mean dismissive at all when I say this, but I have heard some amazing stories about being a realtor while Black, if I can borrow that expression, and they're just troubling. And I'm not talking about the the early 1900s. I'm talking about this week and last month and a year ago, today very much. So it's an issue. Our industry's condition is not great. Could be a lot better, but more than that, though, it's not a secret that it's not great. I'm going to highlight this. The folks from Newsday in 2019, the folks from Newsday, which is a publication in New York, did a story. They did, I think it was like a 3-year investigative story about discrimination in local real estate. And they basically used shoppers, trained shoppers, to go in and talk to realtors about, just making purchases in the areas, in different neighborhoods in New Jersey. I believe they ended up collecting 140 hours of secretly recorded video of these meetings. And all I can tell you is, oh my God, use the link here on the screen, newsday.com/divided. There's a 40-minute video that's very worth it. You're gonna probably be sick to the stomach when you're done with it, but you really ought to watch it. Because what you're gonna realize is that you're gonna find people that look just like you and I, doing the work that we do every day. And when you look at it that way, you realize, yeah, this is not right, the way that we're going about this. So I'm not naive about the complexities of our job. We get put in all kinds of situations. Every now and then we get these, super easy black and white situation when you go, oh my God, that's just, grade A racism. We can't do this, and we walk away. Hopefully we refer them to Maria's group because something not right is going on there. But that's not the bulk of it. The bulk of it is in these other situations, right? If we have a white couple selling the house and they tell us, oh, by the way, don't bring us any black buyers. Again, that's an easy one, right? We know how to deal with that. But what happens when we have maybe graduate students coming into Notre Dame, coming from abroad, maybe a family, Mexican or background, grad students coming in here, and they have kids, and they ask the realtor, hey, can you put me in a neighborhood where, my kids can play with kids like them? It's the same kind of situation that we have to handle, right? The intent feels so different, but once again, we have to be very cognizant of the rules. So I realize that this is really tricky for us. And we're doing a better job, but by no means a perfect job. So I want to talk about going forward. And I want to talk specifically about actions, because I think it's really important that we not just talk, not just make statements, not just dedicate 1 month to this a year, but that we actually have some meaningful actions. So I would say the first thing, like we've been doing here today, is to acknowledge. The second thing is to educate ourselves, not just about the past, but about what can be done now. And then try to change the system, try to fix it. Sam was talking about the system having to do with values of homes and so on and so forth. That's a systemic problem. So there are systemic solutions. All right, so a couple of things. You may find these numbers interesting. I'm going to show you some numbers here. This is the percentage breakdown by Black, Hispanic, and Asian. The first row is the US population in general. The second row is members of the National Association of Realtors. See the difference? Especially in that first column of Blacks. It's difficult for us to be more aware of these issues with minorities and people of color if we don't have them around us. And I think that this is one of the most critical aspects of it. As long as these kinds of imbalances go on, we're going to keep reverting to the way we have always done things as a non-diverse industry. So when you hear about some actions, this is what I'm talking about. Some actions that should help bring these numbers a little closer to the populations that we represent. So I'm going to talk to you about why these factors are the way they are. I personally believe that the more we can kind of expose ourselves to this, it'll just be a lot easier. If we don't have those folks in the room, if we don't have them in the sales meeting, if we're not bumping, shoulders with them, it's easy for us to continue with some of our bad habits. So, 4 reasons here. Why do we have this imbalance? Well, there's a couple of, I'm going to mention these 4. First one, there are fewer non-white because there are fewer non-white homeowners, just like we talked about it before, right? We know the numbers. I believe Darryl mentioned the numbers before. With lower ownership comes lower experience, and they don't see themselves being in that world. I gotta tell you, if you watch HGTV, when I don't watch it all that often, but when I do, it looks pretty white most of the time. Same story. Most agents who join the industry come from these informal networks that we have, right? There are friends and family, and guess what? If our networks are primarily white, that's primarily where the people are going to come in from. That's a known fact. A third reason is that real estate agents today, again, kind of a primarily white industry, are really comfortable with the way things are. I mean, we're doing well, right? We think we are. We're busy, we're doing things, we're serving people, we're delighting our customers, and that's all great. So it feels like we have to kind of go out of our way to do this other thing. And yeah, that's why. And I think based on the reasons that we discussed before, that's why we ought to be doing those things. And the last reason why I think we have these discrepancies is that there's a lot of good intentions, but they're not structured in any kind of real meaningful program. And then they're kind of being scattershot. So better scattershot than nothing, granted, but I think that's where we are. So there's a couple of things. Let's see if that's all I have here. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen. And I just wanna leave you with a couple of real specific things that we have. Because I know that NAR, the state associations, individual companies and individual realtors are doing a number of things. So I can just kind of mention a couple of things. For example, NAR has implemented a program called ACT, Accountability, Culture, and Change. And I'm here to tell you that it was largely a response to the Newsday story. It's embarrassing that we had to be called to action by something like that, but at least we're responding to it with a really full frontal attack on the topic. So in addition to that, there's a lot of training, there's a lot of discussion. So for example, Joshua mentioned in the intro that I'm a past president of the Indiana Association of Realtors. So I know that the association has taken this to heart, and they've implemented a number of actions to not only be aware, but also be educated and then begin to do more. So for example, they've implemented requirements for training for current and future board of director members to be just as educated as anybody else can possibly be in this. They have required that folks receive the At Home with Diversity certification, and they're making that really available and really affordable. They're using the education piece that the association has, RECP, to deliver that information and deliver those courses in the most affordable, most convenient way to folks, so that we can get that information out there. It's being built, back to the systemic, the association is building diversity into the board makeup so that we can do a better job trying to represent these communities and trying to bring those folks in. We said there's not very many folks of color, but we want to find them, we want to help them and give them a voice, put them in the right seat so that the voice can be heard and hopefully be able to make better decisions as we go forward. Our current state president, Roger Lundy in Indiana, has challenged the leadership to engage with 3 pieces, with the At Home with Diversity training, with a simulation called Fairhaven, by the way, that if you haven't gone through it, I highly recommend it. It's available from NAR, it's free, and it's a wonderful tool because it really puts you in that seat of that decision maker, realtor that you are. How will you handle these situations? It's a big investment that NAR did, but it's a wonderful tool, that simulation is. One level closer, as a managing broker for a company, I can tell you that we try to do some things, and some things work and some things don't. But I can tell you we do from the simplest things of trying to represent our community in our advertising. we try to be a little bit more reflective of that. So when you see pictures and when you see some of those messages, we try to do that just because we think it sends the right message. Does it move the needle? Maybe, maybe not, but it's a little tiny thing. We encourage everybody who can to get educated and be welcome to the industry. We speak to minority groups. We encourage them. We have provided scholarships in the past for them to go into the pre-licensing process for becoming a realtor and that. And once they join our company, we have informal peer networks that, again, might give them some support, might give them some comfort in succeeding in this tough industry while being that. So, like I told you, I'm tough with our past, but I'm really hopeful because it was people like us who have made this better in the past, and it will be people like us who will make this better in the future. So we got to be in there. So if you have any ideas, any suggestions, bring them to Myron and the local board, bring them to Mia, bring them to anybody. Just move those things forward because we have to keep moving forward. We have to keep moving the line. And that's it. That's all I had.
John, thank you. And that's a perfect way to wrap up before we get to our Q&A. I just want to really quickly, if all the 60-odd people who are participants here can, please give our panelists a round of applause. This was awesome. And I think we need to do more of these because I've learned so much. And I know a lot of people here did as well. It's so funny because I can't hear any applause, but I see all of them. So that's that's good. Thank you, Sam. Thank you. That means a lot. Okay. Let's get to some question and answers. By the way, during this time, feel free, if you have a question for a specific panelist or a general one, put them in the chat. We will get to those as soon as we can. We'll get to as many as we can as well. I want to go to Deanna really quickly. In those 4,000 calls that you had mentioned, Deanna, one of the people watching asked, out of the 4,000 calls, how many were found to be unjust? Based on what you know, I don't know if any of these investigations are still open or some of them are closed, but on average, even if you can, per year.
How about I put it this way? We probably across, and this is, the same with both HUD and EEOC, because of course we file for EEOC and investigate for EEOC. It's about 2% that we find probable cause. And that's where we believe that the evidence supports the allegations filed by the aggrieved party. And that is based on how the commissioners vote as well. But oftentimes it's no probable cause. They are single-based issues. And oftentimes if we end up with more charges, say for example, based on from more aggrieved parties from one certain entity, then of course we're starting to look at, what's the pattern, what's the issue. And at times we will partner with HUD to investigate those. They might require more of in-depth look. And again, that's where we talk about when you start to see those patterns arise. It may require more of additional resources, that at times we don't necessarily have, but the federal government does have those funds. And so, but it's about 2% where we find probable cause, and that's across the board, both for housing and employment.
Well, that's still high, and like you said, that's still something to pay attention to for a lot.
It is, and just very briefly, and I didn't mean to cut you off, but about 13% of those calls that we received, and actually I have the number here, it's not 13%. Let's see here. So of the 34% calls, roughly about 34% of the calls that we received were housing related. A very high percentage of those, I want to say about maybe anywhere between 14 to 15% were based on disability issues. And part of that is because 14% roughly about the population in South Bend either requires an accommodation or a modification. And so oftentimes we find that we are not aware of what that means, whether we're a landlord, whether, that's the reasoning that I was not aware. And so oftentimes also it's part of our responsibility to be proactive in educating individuals that find themselves on the side of a charge, that they received a charge. So what does this mean? Where do we go? So HUD part of our requirement is to conciliate, you know, as many charges as we possibly can in the best way possible without there being a probable cause issue. That means that the investigator will then work with the respondent to say, okay, so, you know, this is the education that we have, these are the tools, this is what needs to happen, you know, and if the respondent is willing, then we conciliate charges that way. And it's a mutual agreement between all parties involved, and primarily with the agreed party. So,
Okay.
If I can maybe chime in and add, something, because there was a question earlier too, Josh, you mentioned about undocumented people having legal rights or be able to buy property, but they also have legal rights. So we deal a lot with, and we've had this happen several times, where because our community oftentimes can't get into the traditional mortgage world, they end up doing riskier things like land contracts or things like that, where sometimes they don't even have a contract. It's just a shake and they make payments and they hope it all works out. Yeah. Where we had a family, this was not too long ago, people mentioned Jay Lewis, an attorney earlier, he helped a family out. We refer a lot to either attorneys or the Human Rights Commission, had made a huge down payment on a land contract. And before they started or moved in, the owner backed out on the deal and said, I know you're undocumented, you can't do anything about it and you can't get your money back, go away. And they found legal recourse and were able to solve that problem. And I know the family was happy. I don't know the legal details of it, but an undocumented person was able to be represented in court here to solve a matter like that. So we like to promote that so that our community knows, because they often are taken advantage of like that, like, oh, you're undocumented, you can't do this or whatever. And they have a legal right to either get their money back or to move forward with the process as agreed. And so that's a great place also for the Human Rights Commission that we send, saying, hey, if your landlord's not doing things right, it doesn't matter your documentation status in this country, you're able to, you deserve the same things that other people deserve.
Simon, and if I could take that one step further, as a commissioner, I tell you that the Real Estate Commission for Indiana does not deal with a lot of standard fair housing kinds of issues, but we do deal with the contracts issues. So in that example that you mentioned, we may see it as a fair housing issue, but it's also just a bad contract and it's bad practice. So it's a good reminder for these folks who think they may have been the victim of one of these practices, that they have multiple paths that they can pursue at the same time, sometimes in a sequence, sometimes at the same time. So to encourage them to say, go talk to Maria, but also talk about professional standards and also talk to the Attorney General, because you may have three separate paths to seek, restitution or fairness for your situation.
Really quickly, all of what you all have to say is so powerful, and I really appreciate that. I do want to add here that we were supposed to be done about a minute from now. That's not going to happen, don't worry, because we got a giveaway to get to. But really quickly, before that giveaway, if I can limit everybody, the panelists who do want to have any last words or final thoughts, to 30 seconds each. That is a challenge in news, just like it is in the Zoom call, and it's okay, because we're passionate about what we're talking about. But if I want to start with Gabrielle, any last thoughts?
Well, I think I would, we talk what we can do. I would like to mention Gladys Mohammed's Cash Plus initiative of the 90s. She and her group went to all the banks and talked to the bank presidents and told them it's not only that they needed to give mortgages to African Americans, but they needed to help educate people on how to deal with the whole system and so on. And they had some success, but it was hard work, and I'm not sure where it is right now. But so there are things individuals can do if they organize. I think that's crucial to help get more loans to African Americans. And Gladys just did a great job on it.
That's why I call Gladys the Dr. Queen of South Bend. Darryl, if you have any last thoughts, feel free.
The one thing that I will just add is that one of the things we have to reckon with is that it's not enough to say that we've stopped discriminatory practices and now we can move forward. And we have to reckon with the past in a way that accounts for the people that have been harmed. So just think, for example, if the people who were part of Better Homes of South Bend have been able to buy a house in Sunnymead, how much more equity would they have now compared to what they actually have? And so we got to deal with that. And Gabrielle kind of mentioned reparations, and we can call it whatever we want. And, and there's no definition of what it needs to look like, but we do need to engage that conversation. And we need to have it very front and center as part of the activity of moving forward. The harms have been done, and we have to acknowledge, not only acknowledge, but do what we can to repair those harms. So I just want to kind of challenge us to have that.
I think that's crucial.
Yeah, that's integral. Yeah, it is. That's well said, Darryl. John, do you have anything to add here?
Yeah, two thoughts real quick. Echoing on Darryl's point, for everybody else, if the word reparations scares the heck out of you and you think that something maybe too much, too far, look up what Evanston just did. The city of Evanston just did something here. Look that up, read those stories and figure out how they did it, financially how they did it and how they're doing it. And I think that they're a great example. It should not be such a scary thought to us. First thought. Second thought, Joshua, you asked for kind of a closing thing. It gets better. I think it gets better. Not by itself, not magically. It's not great now, but it will get better. And we got to keep doing this. We have to keep coming together and putting time and changing the incidents, changing the systems, but it will get better.
Sam, Deanna, and then giveaway. Okay, Sam, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll be short, and this is where it's interesting for me. I'm biracial, so from my white side to my Latino side, in terms of how I've benefited from the system, is if you've never been oppressed, it means you've benefited from the system, right? And so historically, we always left it to the Gladys Muhammads of the world to say, some African Americans should do something about this injustice, right? It should be all of us should do something about this injustice, especially the people who are in the positions to fix the injustice. And so that's what I always like to remind folks. If you haven't been oppressed, you've benefited from the oppression. And so you need to then find out how you help make it right in your own way.
Yeah, and we continue to benefit even in small things. If you look at I'm sure Darryl would have some statistics here, the property taxes in African American areas are relatively way higher than in wealthy areas. And that should be an easy fix, right? To adjust the property taxes so that the high-end or proper homeowners paying the same percentages as the poor. And it's just not happening. We're paying way too little in the better off areas in terms of property taxes.
And Gabrielle, one of the reasons is because the appeals process that we have, it seems so frightening and so scary to people of lower means. It's like, no, that's beyond me. So I'm never going to appeal my taxes. So it may be that those of us who have means, we know how to use the process and we appeal and we get our taxes properly adjusted down. But somebody who, doesn't understand how that works will never take advantage of the system that way, and they have to pay more.
And lastly, if I can go to Deanna, you got 3.5 seconds now because everybody else ate it up.
No problem. Thank you, everyone. So just very quickly, we have a land contract training going on the 21st of April at 10 o'clock. It will be webinar based, and we will have Judy Fox on, and we're excited about that. Sam, we talked about those land contracts and how they really, really affect the Latino community. And then on the 14th, we have a training about gender in housing. So again, with Judy Fox. So we are excited to bring those programs forward and continue our advocacy and outreach. That's the way we share our information. So thank you, everyone.
This is obvious that everybody, each one of our panelists, they are extremely passionate about and vociferous about everything they stand for, everything that they talk about, they mean it. And it is so informative and so helpful to everybody who's watching, including me. I'm telling you, I learned so much. All right, we've got to give away 5 people at random who are part of this here right now can have an opportunity to receive a signed copy of Gabrielle's book, Better Homes of South Bend, An American Story of Courage. I'm actually upset because I don't have a signed copy, but this is my copy right here. And with that, I think we just got this screen share here. You see the names. We're going to start rolling the names. See who our 5 winners are. I don't know who that was screaming, but stop. Okay, this is Denise Graham is a winner. Denise, does that say Graham or Graves? I think it said Graves. You know who you are. Let's see. Our next winner, number 2. Trisha Greeny, if I said that correctly. If I didn't, I apologize. Trisha, congratulations to you. We got 3 more. I really need this wheel at work. I will have so much fun getting up at 2:30. I promise you. We've got Lee Holland for our third winner. Congratulations. We got two more. We got two more. Hooray! And I think that is Faith. Yeah, Faith Stoll is our fourth winner. And last but not least, winning a signed copy of Gabrielle's book, Better Homes in South Bend, An American Story of Courage, is Angeles Gonzalez. There it is. All five of our winners. Congratulations to each and every one of you. And thank you again to all of our panelists for participating and all the folks who came here to watch this, dozens of you all. I really appreciate that. I just want to say thank you all. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And thank you for everyone who helped put this on. I know we've worked on this for so long and really I didn't do too much of anything on my end. I'm just guiding this conversation. And the conversation, I mean, it's going to go far in so many ways. So I want to say thank you to everyone who made this happen. And again, we've got all the links here. If you missed anything, we've got all the links on the side in the chat where you can go and visit as well. I think I'm going to send it to Myron now. And again, thank you, Myron, and thank all of your staff for putting this.
Josh, thank you very much. We appreciate the time and effort you put in, and it was not a small work on your part. So thank you very much. We appreciate your energy and enthusiasm bringing to this presentation. I'd like to thank now again Gabrielle and Darryl and Sam, Diane, and John for all the work that you've put in preparation. This is a topic that we need to talk about, and I would suggest that everybody moving forward have these frank discussions. And when we set this up, we wanted it to be a frank discussion. I think that came across, but there's still more to talk about. And I think one-on-one dealing with issues, we have to talk about these things, and we can't keep them in a closet. So I would encourage everybody to have these conversations in your office meetings and your one-on-ones, just to say, hey, where are we in terms of fair housing, and what are we doing to make it better? And I think that's our role. When I look at the Code of Ethics, in the preamble of the Code of Ethics for the National Association of Realtors, it basically says, do unto others as you would have them do to you. So we have to take a look at other people's lives and how fair housing impacts them as we would want it to impact us. And that's the key. A couple things I just want to close with. The Newsday expose, or whatever you want to call it, regarding fair housing. The LaPorte County Association of Realtors is on April 29th is doing a presentation via Zoom. They're bringing in Bill Dedman, Pulitzer Prize winning journalist who put that together as part of the news team at Newsday. And I think we have the link there if Carlin can share that with everybody via the chat. That way, if you're interested in signing up for that program, that's another good look at fair housing, and it goes behind the scenes and tells you what happened, what prompted it, how everything came together. And so we just encourage you to sign up for this, and we appreciate the LaPorte County Association of Realtors doing this and calling attention to fair housing issues in their own way. So thank you very much, Iris, and your team over there. Finally, I just want to say again, thank you to everybody who participated. A big thank you to Callahan Carr and Carlin Krzyzewski. They're on our staff team here at the South Bend Area Realtors. They did the lion's share of the work here, and so thank you to your hard work and the presentation that came together so well. And again, everybody for showing up today, for participating. This is an important topic, and we need to talk about it, and we need to make a difference. So thank you very much. Have a great day. And again, we're here to serve you, and if you need anything, just let us know. Thanks.
If I can add really quickly to that, Myron, please do follow South Bend Area Realtors on all social media. They post some interesting facts that may shock you too. And I think that's a good way that if you're not in one of these Zoom meetings, you can still keep up to date with some of the things they post. So Myron, I just wanted to give that plug to you guys.
Sure. And again, we are recording this. So if you have need to share this with your office, with people in your sphere of influence, please feel free to do so. We will have those links available on our website and share that via email with our members so that they can take advantage of that. So again, everybody, thank you very much. Have a great day.
Thank you.
See y'all in the morning.